Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of Maine Cooperative Extension's Preserving the Maine Harvest webinar. I'm Kathy Savoy, and today I'll be joined by four of my colleagues, Kate McCarty, Lisa Fishman, Kate Yerxa, and Laurie Bowen. We're really excited to be back and launching our 2021 Home Food Preservation webinar series. It's called Preserving the Maine Harvest. This webinar series is designed to provide you with the latest and most current USDA recommendations for safely preserving food at home. This year, we're offering these sessions once a month, and we will feature ways to preserve foods in season corresponding with the Maine growing cycle. The mission of the University of Maine Cooperative Extension is to help Maine people improve their lives through an educational process that uses research-based knowledge focused on issues and needs. Our educational programs include agriculture, home horticulture, including the popular Master Gardener Volunteer Program, 4-H youth development, food safety, nutrition, and of course, home food preservation. We'd also like you to know that the University of Maine is prohibited from discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability, and reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activity. Today, we will focus on drying foods, including meat, and ways to ensure our food is kept safe while enjoying outdoor activities like camping, barbecuing, boating, and hiking this summer. First off, we have some housekeeping. We have our webinar set up so that you can hear and see us, but we cannot hear or see you. But we do want to answer your questions. So please ask them as they come up for you during our presentation by using the Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Simply type your question in and we'll get to it during our Q&A session. Thanks again for joining us, and we'd like to get started today with a poll. So, the first poll is, did you attend any of our Preserving the Harvest webinars last year? And if you could please just respond with yes or no. We've got quite a few people on today's webinar, so we'll give you another few seconds to get your answers in there. And then we'll stop the poll in 5. Oh, stop the poll, great, and we'll share those results with you. And we would like to give a hearty welcome back to 7 of you who attended last year's webinar. And we're really excited to have a lot of first-timers here with us this year. Actually, 72% of today's live attendees are new to our webinar series. So welcome to everyone. And so we're going to get started with today's topic, which is food drying, also known as dehydration. And this is a great way to create long-lasting, shelf-stable, and lightweight snacks and meals. We will overview how the process preserves food. We will also talk about how to store these dried foods and also how to use them. First, let's discuss how drying preserves your foods. There's a lot of science here, so let's get started with the discussion. The process of dehydration removes water from your food so that the water is not available to support the growth of those spoilage organisms, things like molds, yeast, and bacteria. To make dehydration happen, what we're doing is applying low heat to our food, which will cause that water to evaporate. We recommend applying a temperature of 140 degrees to fruits, vegetables, and meats for proper dehydration. It also helps to provide ventilation so that the moist air around the food is replaced by drier air so that the water can continue to evaporate. Outdoor drying is not recommended in Maine. Successful dehydration of fruits and vegetables outdoors requires daytime temperatures that are above 85 degrees Fahrenheit and nighttime temperatures that are above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And humidity also plays a role. You want to have humidity that is less than 60%. So you can see that we do not have these conditions in Maine. When it gets hot, we also are very humid here in Maine. So outdoor drying is better suited to the Southwest United States, where they have both of those hot and dry environments. Attempting to dehydrate outdoors in improper conditions will result in food spoiling before it is fully dehydrated. And that's certainly something that we are looking to avoid. So instead of outdoor drying, we recommend using an electric dehydrator or your oven. Electric dehydrators come at a variety of price points, and the adage, "you get what you pay for," often applies. We encourage you to look for a dryer that has a fan, as well as one with a heating element that is found in the lid or in the back of the unit. If the fan is in the bottom of the dryer, you'll see that liquids can drip down into the heating element and will shorten the lifespan of the appliance and also put off strong odors while it is drying your foods. So the dehydrator that you see in our slideshow comes with 4 trays, but you can actually dry up to 20 trays of food effectively. Has a really high output as far as the fan and the kilowatts. It heats from 90 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can dehydrate everything from herbs to jerky. Some foods can also be dried using your home oven. As the ideal temperature for drying fruits and vegetables is that magic number of 140 degrees, you will need to set your oven on its lowest setting. Some ovens do have a warm setting that is below 200 degrees Fahrenheit. You can let some of the heat escape by propping open your oven door and then using a fan to create more ventilation and circulation of that hot air. However, this setup can be a bit tricky, so we don't recommend it in a home where you have young children or active pets that could knock over the fan. So be aware of that. We're now going to switch and hear from Lisa, who will share steps involved in dehydrating fruits, vegetables, and meats. So let's have Lisa join us from her Aroostook County location. Lisa?
Thank you, Kathy. Indeed, Aroostook County, the crown of Maine. So we do know that dried foods are great for backpacking and camping. They're lightweight, they're shelf stable. Plus, when you dehydrate, it's a great alternative for canning, especially if you can't find canning supplies and you need to use another method of preserving. And don't we all know what 2020 was like trying to source any kind of canning supplies? Dried foods are also very space efficient because they shrink in size significantly during the dehydrating process. We're going to play a short video for you to demonstrate how to dehydrate fruits, and then we'll play another one on how to dehydrate vegetables. So I'll see you back on the other side of the video.
Hi, I'm Kate McCarty, Food Preservation Program Aide at University of Maine Cooperative Extension. Dehydrating or drying fruit is a great way to create your own snacks at home while controlling the amount of added sugar. Take advantage of local or homegrown fruit and preserve them using an electric dehydrator. Solar dehydrating is not recommended in Maine because of our high humidity levels and low nighttime temperatures. To dehydrate fruit, you'll need an electric dehydrator, a cutting board, a knife, and a peeler. Materials to store dried fruit in need to be airtight and made of plastic or glass. Rinse fruit and peel as needed, then slice into equal-sized pieces. To dry whole fruits, like berries, dip into boiling water for 15 to 30 seconds or until the skin split. Spread fruit pieces on dehydrator trays, making sure to avoid overlap. Dehydrate at 140 degrees Fahrenheit until dry. Fruit pieces are dry when they are still flexible, but do not stick to themselves when folded in half. This can take anywhere from 12 to 36 hours, depending on the types of fruit you're drying and how thick the pieces are. Dry fruit thoroughly to avoid spoilage. You can also create a low-sugar fruit leather by blending fruit like berries with applesauce as a healthy alternative to store-bought fruit snacks. To store your dried fruit, pack it into an airtight plastic or glass container and store in a cool, dark, dry place. To learn more about dehydrating food, visit University of Maine Cooperative Extension's website.
So you may also opt to use a pre-treatment to keep your fruit from darkening. So light-colored fruits like apples and pears and peaches will start to darken once they've been cut and have been exposed to air. You can use lemon juice, or you can use ascorbic acid as a dip when you're cutting up your fruit to prevent this darkening. Once your fruit is thoroughly dry, it will need to go into a process called conditioning. This will help to evenly distribute the remaining moisture throughout the pieces of fruit. You'll let your fruit cool completely, and then you'll pack it loosely into plastic or glass food-grade jars. Seal the containers and let them sit for 7 to 10 days, and you'll want to check them every few days to look for moisture. If any condensation appears in the jar, that means that the fruit is not thoroughly dried and will need some more drying time. After a week, if there is no more condensation building up on the jar, you can package your fruit in an airtight container. Again, it's really important to make sure these are food-grade containers, which means that they are intended to hold food. You can pack the fruit more tightly into these containers than you would as you did for conditioning. You can also use zip-top bags in individual portion sizes, and this will help prevent your food from absorbing moisture from the air as you repeatedly open the bag and take some of that fruit out. So now we're going to watch another short video on drying vegetables, and I'll see you at the end.
Hi, I'm Kate McCarty, University of Maine Cooperative Extension Food Preservation Program Aide. Dehydrating or drying vegetables is a great way to create lightweight snacks and meals for outdoor activities. Preserve your local or homegrown vegetables using an electric dehydrator. Solar dehydrating or outdoor drying is not recommended in Maine because of our high humidity levels and low nighttime temperatures. The supplies that you'll need are an electric dehydrator, a cutting board, knife, stock pot, peeler, blanching basket, colander, paper towels, dish towels. Materials to store dried foods in need to be airtight and made of plastic or glass. With clean hands, clean equipment, and a clean work surface, you're ready to start. To begin, rinse and prepare vegetables as needed. Peel, shred, or chop into equal-sized pieces. To improve the quality of your dried product, blanch or dip into boiling water for a specific amount of time before dehydrating. Drain vegetables well in a colander and dry using clean kitchen towels or paper towels. See our website for specific blanching times. Spread vegetable pieces out on dehydrator trays, making sure to avoid overlap. Dehydrate at 140 degrees Fahrenheit until dry. Vegetables are dry when they are brittle, crisp, and retain 10% moisture. Drying can take anywhere between 3 and 18 hours depending on the vegetable you're drying and how thick the pieces are. Dry vegetables thoroughly to avoid spoilage. To store, pack vegetables into airtight plastic or glass containers and keep in a cool, dark, dry place. Dried vegetables need to be rehydrated before use. Rehydrate by soaking in water for several hours. For more information on dehydrating food, visit University of Maine Cooperative Extension's website.
So as Kate mentioned in the video, dried vegetables do need to be rehydrated. So it's best to use them in cooked applications like stews or soups or casseroles. Now, Kate mentioned in the video that you would want to rehydrate dried vegetables in water, either hot or cold, but you can get a little more creative and you can add them directly to your dishes as long as your dishes have lots of liquid in them, such as a soup or a stew. You can also soak them in broth or a vegetable juice if you want to add more flavor. They'll rehydrate within 1 to 2 hours of soaking generally. You could also take your dried vegetables and grind them into powders, and you can use these powders to boost the flavor in your cooking and your baking. So for instance, I like to make celery powder, and I use 2 full bunches of celery, stalks and leaves all together when they're dried and ground up to make this celery powder. And I just used a coffee grinder or a nut grinder if you have them, a really inexpensive type of appliance. We're going to now switch gears and we're going to talk a little bit about how to make your own dried jerky. Now, jerky is dehydrated meat strips, and it's a great product to make at home because it's less expensive than store-bought versions, and you can control the ingredients that you add. You can make your own marinades, whether it's a spicy black pepper type of jerky or all the way up to a sweet teriyaki type of jerky. There are some food safety concerns that come with dehydrating meat, however, and you want to make sure that you heat the meat to a proper temperature to kill any germs. Now, we talked about meat and other vegetables and fruits being dehydrated at 140 degrees, but this temperature is not high enough to kill germs that can cause food spoilage or illness. So an extra step is going to be needed to ensure the safety of your homemade jerky. Now, this can be done in several ways, either by baking or boiling the meat before you're drying, or baking it after it's been dried. Heating the meat to an internal temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit will reduce the risk that your beef jerky will spoil or make you sick. We're going to go visit Kate in the demonstration kitchen now, and she's going to cover the steps that you'll need to take to prepare beef for dehydrating.
Great, thank you, Lisa, and hello, everyone. I'm here in our Falmouth, Maine demonstration kitchen, and I've got beef in several stages of dehydration to walk you through the process. So we will have a little bit of what we call TV magic, because of course we're not going to be able to show you how to fully dehydrate beef jerky from a raw product to a finished product within our 45-minute webinar here today. So I did some homework ahead of time and prepared some fully dehydrated version to show you. But first, let me just review what Lisa said, talking about how drying makes beef safe for you to then store at room temperature and enjoy much longer than you would obviously a burger or something that you had cooked fresh. So we're applying a very low heat. Your beef jerky is just dehydrated at 140 degrees Fahrenheit for a long period of time. This slowly evaporates the moisture from the meat. The fan inside the dryer carries away that moist air, replaces it with a relatively drier air, so the moisture can continue to evaporate. And you dehydrate it thoroughly, so there's no moisture left in the product that germs need to survive. So the idea is to get it nice and dry so that there's no water for the germs to grow in, which then would make you sick if you ate. But because we're only cooking beef at any meat at 140 degrees Fahrenheit, the internal temperature of the meat is not going to get up high enough to the point where we are really sure that it's safe for you then to leave at room temperature to make sure that all potential spoilage organisms have been destroyed. And so in addition to the dehydration, which is removing moisture, there is the added step of heating the meat in an additional way when it comes to making meat jerky. So this is a special step that you don't have to do with fruits, vegetables, or herbs because of the greater risk of food safety concerns around a meat product. So your two options are, once you've sliced up your beef, I'm going to keep saying beef because that's what I'm using here today, but this applies to all types of animal products that you make. So if you're using a whole cut of of meat. Once you slice it up and marinate it for flavor, you then want to boil the meat in that marinade at a full rolling boil, so a very active boil for 1 minute. So that ensures that you've cooked the meat, so then you can safely have it out for the few hours that it takes for it to dehydrate in the dryer. Your other alternative is to just put it in the dryer, fully dehydrate it, but then bake it in your oven at 275 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes. And then that will bring the internal temperature of the meat strips up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the recommended temp to ensure safety. So that was a lot of numbers, of course, and we're going to follow up with fact sheets that have this process laid out for you. But just so you know, there's an added step where you're either boiling the meat in the marinade before you dry it or baking it after you dry it. And that is for safety, so you should not skip that step. Now let's get more into what I'm actually doing here today, which is showing you how to make this beef jerky using I want to say a top round roast. So I just went to the store and got an inexpensive steak because the inexpensive ones are typically the ones that you need to cook for a long time, marinate like a slow cooker, or marinate for a long time to get tender. And that means that they also don't have a lot of fat, and that's the ideal kind. So you don't need to spend your money on having a sirloin or the higher cuts of steak that you would use on the grill, because those are nice and marbled with fat for flavor, whereas that's going to work against you in jerky and create a lot of oil, and the fat at room temperature could spoil. So you're really looking for a leaner cut. So any kind of cut like a flank steak, the top round, the London broil, all of those types of steak will work for beef jerky, which then goes to show just how inexpensive it is compared to a store-bought version. So this was just from the grocery store for $7 a pound, and it's going to yield a little more than 4 ounces of beef jerky, which in the store would be several times that for $7. So I cut it into nice thin strips, which you can easily do. And Kate, if you want to switch to the overhead view, it'll be doing that from here on out. Cutting it into thin strips is not easy unless you have a very sharp knife. The beef is a little wiggly. So an added tip is to pop the steak in the freezer. I think I just froze it for like 20 minutes. And that made it much easier to cut, because you really want to cut it into thin strips, like 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. And so it helps to have a little bit of firmness that the freezer will provide to give you that nice thin strips. Thin strips will mean that it dries faster. It's more thoroughly dried. And of course, you're aiming to have each strip be evenly sliced so that they all dry at the same time and you don't have some strips that aren't dry when others are over dry. So slice it nice and thin. And another tip is to cut it against the grain, which I really had to like look at this cut of beef and examine like which way is the grain going. So this means the steak will have long muscle fibers throughout it, and you want to cut against them, so perpendicular to where the long muscle fibers are. And by cutting those fibers into little 1/4 inch pieces, that will give you a much more tender jerky. You can envision a long strip of beef with the fibers running parallel to the shape of the beef. When you put it in your teeth and bite down on it and pull on it, really what you're doing is just ripping those muscle fibers, and it's going to be very difficult to eat. So the cutting against the grain will give you a product that's easier to eat. So then I marinate these little strips. So that's what state they're in now, is marinated and drained in my colander here. The marinade I used is from the National Center for Home Food Preservation, and it's got lots of flavorful ingredients. So I used Worcestershire sauce, soy sauce, and then, so that was the liquid, onion, garlic powder, a fresh cracked pepper, and lemon pepper. It's called for seasoned salt, but we didn't have any, so I used lemon pepper, which also has salt in it. So I only marinated for about an hour. That's what's recommended. Any longer than that, and it might become overly salty and taste unpleasant. You can also purchase, of course, jerky spice kits, which come in all sorts of fun flavors. The cost might be a little bit higher than you need to pay when it's just really just spices and common household condiments. So there's no reason that you need to turn to a prepackaged product. So I've got my nice thin strips marinated for an hour, dried in the colander, or excuse me, drained in the colander. And then I'm ready to transfer them to my dehydrator tray. So, and I'm gonna go wash my hands again. I washed my hands like 5 times already preparing this beef, but I'm gonna do it one more time just for safety's sake. So when you're laying your strips out on the dryer, what you really just need to be sure of is that they don't overlap. So an overlapping piece will prevent the air from flowing around it properly and prevent it from drying effectively. So you'll have uneven spots of dryness. So spread them out. The way the trays are laid out are made out of these little plastic, I don't know, grid. Is that lets the air pass through from the dehydrator's heating unit in the top of the unit, and it flows around these circular trays in like a column fashion. So pushing it down and the hot air rising throughout the tray. So I got about a half tray's worth here. This is probably a quarter of the total steak. I just saved a little portion to show on camera, and I dehydrated the rest. I wash my hands again. I end up feeling like a doctor when you're working with meat because you wash your hands so frequently. And so then I'm ready to put it into the dehydrator. So we would just repeat with a larger batch. Of course, you would just repeat this until it was all the trays were filled. And this dehydrator's got a plastic base. Just a nice solid piece here with no features in it except for that the trays fit into it. And so I've got my one tray of raw beef. Then I would just set the temperature on top here to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, I do want to back up because another thing that's unique to drying meat is that you want to preheat your dryer. So at the point that you pull your strips out to start draining them and laying them out on the tray, you want to turn the dryer on to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So you don't waste any time heating that beef. So once it goes into the dryer, it starts to heat rather than waiting for it to preheat while the food is in there. So that is also unique to jerky, is to preheat your dehydrator. So here's the TV magic. Admittedly on camera, I think it looks pretty similar to the raw beef, but the dried, maybe a little darker in color. The dry beef, I set it for 6 hours for these strips, and they came out very thin. That was just based on the thickness of the steak itself, so I didn't have any control over that. So you want to test the dryness of these strips to see that it bends but doesn't break. And this kind of breaks, so it might be a little overdone, which is fine. That just affects the texture of it, so it might be a little crunchier than it need be. I've definitely heard from people who say I like it crunchy, and so they dry it a lot. I think the recommendation is like 4 to 10 hours, depending on how thin you've sliced it. I felt like I did a pretty good job slicing these thin. This one is like paper thin practically after being dried. So I set it for 6. And then once I feel like it's dry, feel pretty good about that, you want to come back and blot any oil. So if you've got a fatty piece, you want to dry it off because the oil again could go rancid during storage. I trimmed a lot of the fat off the steak before I sliced it, so I don't see a lot that needs to be blotted. And so what I will do now is then move it to a baking sheet, because I'm opting for the after treatment where you bake it in the oven. For whatever reason, I feel like just baking it is going to give me a better product than if I boiled it. I don't think boiling the meat sounds very appealing. So I'm just going to lay it out. So again, not overlapping on the baking sheet. I've got my oven preheated at 275 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'll pop these strips in here to bake them for safety so that they are safe for storage. So once they've been baked, you are ready to store them. You're going to use plastic or glass airtight containers, just like all your other dried products. So this is a 16-ounce mason jar with a plastic storage lid on top, which will be perfect for drying or storing your strips of jerky. So you'd fill this container, and then if you want to leave it at room temperature, it's recommended to eat these strips within 1 or 2 months. Since we didn't add any commercial preservatives like they do in a store-bought product, the shelf life might be shorter than that you buy from the store. So if you are looking to do a lot and then store it for longer, you can refrigerate it or even put it in the freezer to ensure that it will last longer. You can also put it in a zip storage bag, and this would be great to portion it out So then when you're ready to go on your camping trip, you could just grab one bag and take it with you and eat the whole bag versus a giant gallon-sized bag where you'd be opening it and closing it to remove portions as you need them. So a bunch of little smaller bags would be ideal for keeping the air out of it because it could absorb moisture from the air and then spoil. All right, I believe that is the end of my jerky demonstration. I'm going to get my raw strips going here for my second batch. We will get to your questions after we hear a little bit more from Kathy on outdoor food safety. Kathy, take it away.
All righty. Thanks, Kate. That was a great demo. And hopefully folks picked up some tips to use next time they are preparing any sort of beef jerky. So now that you've got your lightweight camp meals and hiking snacks, let's discuss outdoor food safety. Whether it's camping, boating, RVing, hiking, or barbecuing, it often involves taking perishable foods on the go. This is all good unless foods are stored in a way that allows them to warm up into what we call the temperature danger zone. This range of temperatures includes above 40 degrees Fahrenheit and below 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is that temperature where germs grow best. Molds, yeast, and bacteria all can multiply to dangerous levels if food is left to sit at this temperature for more than 2 hours. So the takeaway is to keep your perishable foods cold and to also properly cook your foods before eating. So if you're storing perishable food items, this includes raw meats, eggs, or leftovers in a cooler while at the campsite or anywhere else you've got your cooler, be sure the temperature of your cooler stays below 40 degrees. This can be tricky. Some tips. Consider freezing your food before you go on a multi-day camping adventure. Not only will they stay colder for longer, but they will also help to keep the cooler cold as well. Keep your cooler filled with plenty of ice, frozen items, and beverages that will help to keep the temperature down as well. And you also want to make sure that any raw meat that you have in your cooler is well sealed in order to prevent any of those liquids or juices from contaminating other foods in the cooler. I always make sure to bring extra food wrap and storage containers with me, so proper food storage while enjoying the outdoors is a cinch. Let's talk a little bit about hand washing. Kate did a great job demonstrating the importance of washing your hands frequently while working with foods like raw meat. You want to make sure that you're doing that in the great outdoors as well. Wash hands well before preparing food. And also make sure that any dishware that you're using gets washed as well. This can avoid contamination from leftover food or those microorganisms that can cause foodborne illness. Finally, we want to stress the importance of cooking raw meat thoroughly. Heating meat to the proper temperature will help to destroy any disease-causing bacteria like Salmonella. What you're seeing on the slide is the "Is it done yet?" chart from the USDA to help you know what temperature you need to cook your meats and seafood to ensure safety. We hope that you have plans to enjoy the outdoors this summer and that these tips for creating your own dried foods and cooking outdoors safely will help with that. We also hope we have plenty of great weather in Maine this summer to be able to enjoy the great outdoors. So now let's switch gears and head over to Lori to answer any of those questions that you have added to the Q&A box.
Thanks, Kathy. We do have a couple of questions. The first one is from Noel. I dry my fruits with a home dehydrator, then usually freeze for longer shelf life. How can I store them without using plastic? We try to avoid the chemicals, so prefer to use chemical-free options.
Really appreciate your efforts to reduce the amount of plastics that are being used. That's awesome. And hopefully you saw that when Kate was doing her demo, she included a way to use glass to store her foods in. And this could also be done in your freezer since glass can be frozen. If something is liquid, which we wouldn't be expecting in a dehydrated food, you just want to make sure and allow for ample headspace because things do expand when they freeze. But again, that's not necessarily an issue with our dehydrated foods. Anyone have anything else to add? Okay, next.
All right, our next question is from Steve. I experimented with dehydrating peaches last year, our own and bought. Our peaches were sweeter and noticeably better. First washed them in ascorbic citric acid solution, then dehydrated. My question, what is your suggestion for the best thickness to slice them? Another way to ask this question, what is the thickest that you would slice them?
Kate, do you want to?
I'm going to look and see in the National Center for Home Food Preservation what they recommend. So I want to say that the thickness obviously is going to be impacted by, excuse me, the other way around. The drying time is going to be impacted by thickness. So, I mean, technically you can dry whole fruits as long as they're thoroughly dried. It just is going to maybe take a lifetime. So you can, I think you can choose your thickness just as long as you ensure that it's thoroughly dry. So yeah, the research recommendations say halve them, remove the pit, and then you could quarter it or slice it. Like you said, you're using the ascorbic acid to keep it from darkening. Yeah, so it doesn't have a specific thickness. Pears, it does say 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. I think typically 1/4 inch is like the recommended thickness, but I could see going up to 1/2 inch, just knowing that it will take longer and that you really want to make sure that everything is fully dehydrated. Because if you're so in love with these peach slices, which I understand why, local peaches are the best, and you're happy with your product, it'd be really sad if you didn't ensure that they were dry and of course then found they were molding. So what do you think of that answer, Kathy, about I'd go 1/2 inch at the thickest? No,
I think that's great. And I oftentimes will see commercially dehydrated halves of peaches. So, you know, that's beyond that. And I think Kate in one of the videos gave some pretty good examples of how you know if your fruit is adequately dried for safety.
Awesome. So we do have a question from Susan. Can you use a Mylar bag to store dried vegetables? And can you use Silica Packs to maintain that dryness?
So you will often see that commercially dehydrated foods do come with those silica packs in them, which are clearly labeled not to consume, because that is a concern. I have not seen many people use those in home food preservation, but I don't see a reason why you couldn't. It would just be a matter of how you can access those. And then the Mylar bag, Kate, are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with Mylar. I just think of Mylar and I think of a balloon. So like any sort of bag, the kicker is really just to ensure that it's a food grade surface. So you don't want to be repurposing something that you received like electronics in or anything. Just make sure it's meant to hold food and come in contact with your food, because there could be a transfer of material from the storage to the food.
Okay, I think I'm going to try to sneak one last question in. I think we have time. It's from Steve as well. Dehydrating tomatoes. I did a few gallons and have stored them in the freezer. Can I store them in glass, not in a freezer? And what would the shelf life be?
Yeah, you certainly can store your dry products in glass, not in the freezer. The freezer does really help extend the shelf life. So what is the shelf life of products stored not in the freezer? I'm looking at a fruit fact sheet. Do you know off the top of your head, Kathy?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can say dehydrated tomatoes are one of the things that I've really enjoyed. And I will add particularly dehydrated cherry tomatoes. We all know how productive cherry tomato plants can be, particularly if you bought a 6-pack of them. And we've had really good luck slicing them in half and then dehydrating them. They honestly taste like candy. They're so sweet anyways. And then when you dehydrate them, they're getting even sweeter as the water is removed. You can also add some seasonings such as oregano, basil. They truly are a treat to have. Kate, did you find that? My concern with taking something out of the freezer and then leaving it in glass to store, you're going to want to watch that product and see if it's putting off any moisture. Because you may find that there is some moisture if you take it from the freezer and then leave it at room temperature, and that could become problematic down the road. So keep your eye on that product.
All right, I did find advice for drying or for storage times, and says dried fruits should be stored for a year at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 6 months at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So the temperature will affect the storage time. And then dried vegetables are about half the shelf life, so about 6 months to 3 months, depending on the temperature. So what do we consider tomatoes? Fruit? I'd say with the moisture level, they're probably closest to the to fruit. So a year if it's a cool temperature. Good luck getting through all your tomatoes, Steve.
So we're off to Lisa.
I think so. So we have some information to share with you on our recommended resources. You'll be getting all of these resources in the follow-up email that will include a link to our program evaluation. And for those of you who fill out the program evaluation, we've got a prize for you. Remember to include your mailing address with your completed evaluation, and we will send you a refrigerator thermometer that can be used to help you know if your cooler is keeping your foods at or below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have information from the National Center for Home Food Preservation. We've got information from the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. We've got information from a variety of resources that will help you have a safe and delicious summer with all of these skills that you've learned today. We'll also be sharing with you a great interactive directory of Maine farm products that our University of Maine agriculture colleagues have created. And that'll help you shop directly at farms. Now, in certain parts of the state, strawberry season has arrived early, and there are many farms in the southern part of the state that are open for picking your own berries this week, which is about 2 weeks early. And Kathy has discovered a wonderful use for some of these strawberries, and I'll let her tell you all about it.
Thanks, Lisa. So for the past several years, I've had my eye on this one recipe that uses fresh strawberries. And this year I found the time, because it didn't take much, to make myself some strawberry refrigerator balsamic pickles. And I can tell you, they are absolutely delicious. This recipe comes to us from Marissa McClellan in her Food in Jars book, and we will include a link to that website in our resources. I am amazed by the flavor that is in this product. And it is a classic refrigerator pickle recipe in that you just create a brine and then cool it and put it over some sliced fresh strawberries. I cannot wait to have a lovely spinach salad with these products on top of it. But anyways, I also want to tell you about our Preserving Coach program, which is back for 2021. This is an opportunity for Maine residents to be paired with a trained master food preserver volunteer to receive preserving advice throughout the growing season. So if you're a Maine resident and if you're interested in learning more about preserving with a personal coach, simply email Kate McCarty to get connected. Also, we'll be back on July 20th to demonstrate the boiling water bath canning method with a seasonal recipe. We'll be sure to share resources and recipes from today's topic, as well as the registration for our next webinar via an email that you'll see in your inbox very soon. And if we didn't get to your question, we will follow up with you by email since we are at exactly 12:45 and that's when we wrap up our webinar. So thanks so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have some new folks with us this year, as well as returning webinar attendees. That's all from me. Thanks everyone for being with us today.
Hi everyone, thanks a lot.